Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kason.
And I'm Super Derek. I have a RPG review channel, Super Derek RPGs, where I talk about RPGs and news and RPG memories and such.
So essentially, you like the same things that we like. So we decided to get together and talk about it today. Isn't that great? If you guys are interested in taking a look at Super Derek's channel, it's in the description. So check out the video description. Check out his videos. He makes great stuff. If you like our videos, you'll like his videos, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Today, what are we talking about? We're going to talk about...
big Final Fantasy 7 Remake news.
Yes.
Tetsuya Nomura. I think it was an interview with Famitsu.
He did an interview. He's done a couple of interviews recently. There was one with I think it was like a French website.
Yeah.
Another one, I think it was either with Famitsu or someone else. But talking a little bit about why they didn't show Final Fantasy VII Remake at the at E3 this year. You know, their focus was on Kingdom Hearts 3.
He says they're getting ready to show it again, though. They're planning when they're going to show it next. So, yay. Whatever that means.
In particular, though, I was reading this article on Polygon, and they have a couple quotes here from here that I kind of wanted to go over. He says, "I'm well aware of the fact that we announced it too early," in reference to FF7 Remake. "But even in the industry, word was beginning to spread that we were working on the game, so we just decided not to keep it more secret and officially reveal it." And later on he says, "Deciding when to announce your game to the public is always difficult. In our case, we receive pressure from the fans even when we do not announce anything. People are waiting for new information regardless of whether the game has been announced or not." And then there was one other part.
He said development is moving along, so please wait for the next news release with peace of mind.
Yes.
That's a very important one, yes.
Thank you so much. I will do that because you told me to.
All concerns totally assuaged by now.
Yep.
So I have peace of mind because you told me to have it.
With no worries whatsoever.
So before we get started talking about this, Derek, what has been your feelings about the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Just the remake in general, how it's been progressing, the way that they've given us news or the lack of news in the last couple of years. Well, what is your feeling on the original game?
What a rabbit hole. It's not a very big question at all.
No.
But yeah, so as far as like the remake goes, I always kind of wonder, like, is this a game that really needed to be remade? I mean, does any game really need to be remade?
I possibly made a video about that 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, it definitely hasn't aged very well, but I mean, there's so much in the game that was special because of the limitations of the hardware at the time that you could. It allowed you to infer a lot about the game, and I think that by remaking it now, they're gonna have to do a lot of things more explicitly, and won't allow your imagination to run as wild as it would have otherwise. Now, as far as like the history of the development and everything, I was kind of concerned at first when CyberConnect 2 was involved, and because they're known for making like the Dot Hack series, which is basically an experiment in chopping up one video game and selling it to you multiple times.
Yeah. Which is kind of what they were talking about with releasing episode 7 in parts, right? Yeah.
And now I'm concerned because they're not involved anymore. So it's like, oh, now they're not involved.
Pick a side, Derek.
No, the trick is to just be unhappy no matter what happens.
There you go.
Well, that actually is the end result, almost no matter what. If you're a fan of Square Enix, it's kind of like frustrating.
Right?
just to live. What's funny, though, is that they were talking about how Final Fantasy VII, they wanted it to meet the expectations or even possibly exceed the expectations of the Final Fantasy VII remake, right? Or the Final Fantasy VII, the original game. So they're talking about how, oh, we're making this game, and then they're like, oh, by the way, CyberConnect 2 is making it. It's like, what? They're gonna make one of the great masterpieces of all time? I don't think so. Like, I was skeptical to begin with.
Yeah.
So your feelings on it are pretty similar, I think, to a lot of people. Skeptical, but still excited. Right. Did you love the original? Yeah. Did you love the original, Derek?
You know, the original wasn't one that I had actually played when it first came out. It somehow I missed. It's like my big RPG of the PlayStation era was Legend of Dragoon.
Okay.
Nice.
That's a good game.
But and Final Fantasy VII, by the time I had gotten to it, had already started aging, and it's continued to age. So I know that at the time that it came out, it was really important to a lot of people, but unfortunately, it didn't really have that same impact on me.
Well, a lot of people, a lot of our fan base will agree with you, actually. But most of them won't.
I know.
I do want to bring up one more thing, though, Mike. I think this is what you were looking for to mention, but didn't quite find it. He says, according to Nomura, the Final Fantasy VII Remake will delve into the members of Avalanche.
Oh, yeah, expanding Avalanche's story.
Yeah. While preserving the atmosphere of the original, the scenario will dig deeper into the characters. Now, we already talked before about how we don't know if they're going to include these Crisis Core, like Loveless, Angeal, like these different characters that had been introduced a little bit later. But when they talk about Avalanche, and we're going to go deeper into that organization, that's like before Crisis, the little phone game. They talk a bit about Avalanche. Avalanche is older than you thought it was, of course, and it goes back a very long time. And they might be including stuff from before Crisis into this Final Fantasy VII Remake now. So we have a lot of things to worry about, I think, when it comes to them including their additional media and putting it into this game, which should just be a remake of the original.
Well, I'm going to be disappointed if they don't include Dirge of Cerberus in this remake.
They will! Once you get to Vincent, it's going to be... Oh, man.
The thing that I kind of took from at least these I guess quotes from the interview here was admission that they announced it too early, but their reasoning behind it is like we want to avoid leaks, we want to announce it before something is leaked, we want to like basically hype our own thing, and that part of it I thought was interesting. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit. Like, is it worth it? Like, I mean, this goes for everyone in the chat, everyone who's watching after the stream, and to you guys as well. Like, where do you fall on this? Do you think it's better to announce something yourself and be like the first one to say it, or is it better to let people speculate, let a leak possibly happen, but wait to actually talk about it until it's at a stage where it's ready to be shown and it's something you're proud of, something that you're ready to talk about?
That one, the second option, please. I prefer that, like, by far, because obviously the problem they ran into is why, like, people now expect this. That quote is at odds, though. Like, we'll have to take him at face value. We'll say, okay, he means that they released it because word was spreading and they didn't want it to spread, I guess. But in the past, he said they announced it just to kind of build hype for the PlayStation, which is why they announced it at Sony's event, which is why they wanted more people to buy the PS4. So for Final Fantasy 15. And so they announced Final Fantasy 7 at the E3 so that people would buy it anyways. And it turns out it may not even come out for the PlayStation 4. That's what I have heard before from Nomura. Yeah. And now he's saying, oh, well, actually, it was going to get announced anyway, so we just beat people to the punch. But I think that's a terrible idea. And especially the way they announced it. This was a massive trailer. This wasn't like oh, no, it's getting leaked, let's hurry. It was like, no, this was months. This was a lot of rendering and development, and there was a lot that went into this trailer.
And to be honest, there were rumors. There were rumors going on about Final Fantasy VII Remake since like the PS3 demo.
Yeah, since like 2003 or something like that, a long time ago.
Like, could you imagine if they hadn't announced it themselves, if you had just heard yet another rumor about a Final Fantasy VII Remake? Like,
I wouldn't have believed it.
Exactly.
I'd have been like, yeah, right.
It'd be right there next to, oh yeah, they're remaking Shenmue 3 too. Haha.
I've heard that too. Oh, and freaking what's the Mother 3 is coming to the Nintendo eShop. We've been hearing these rumors for forever. Like it, and of course they're actually happening now, which is pretty cool. All three of them.
Fingers crossed for Chrono Break.
Yeah, Chrono Break. Yes.
But yeah, that's apparently not a very uncommon sentiment about like companies trying to beat leaks to the punch, and I'm not really sure why. And I think that's also part of why Bethesda went ahead and announced Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield.
But we knew they were making it. Like, what leak could possibly have happened? And they didn't even show us anything about it with Elder Scrolls 6. It's just like, hey, we're working on this. It's like, yeah, we figured you were working on that. Yeah, we figured it would look like that too. They just give us one mountain shot, and that was it.
Now, in Final Fantasy VII's case, I think like everyone can infer there's going to be an Elder Scrolls 6, but there was endless speculation and no assurance that there would be a Final Fantasy VII remake, right? So had that leaked, is that more of a factor than, say, Elder Scrolls 6 leaking? You know what I mean?
Yes, but I think what Derek was getting at was that nobody would have believed it, because the leak of Final Fantasy VII is being remade has been issued over and over on, not 4chan, what was the other one called? NeoGAF, for like 15 years now. And it's like, they're remaking it. Nobody believes it. Nobody believes it. So it would have been kind of like that, unless someone had something to show for it. Unless Square Enix was like, oh no, someone smuggled out footage. Someone smuggled out character models and scripts. That's a problem. But it's like that probably didn't happen.
Well, I mean, I'm sure if they had that sort of information, maybe they'd be telling us about it. If they had footage,
if they even had,
because we know nothing. Yeah, because we've been starved for information and nothing else has leaked. So what were they so worried about? I don't get it.
Oh no, this trailer we put together is going to leak if we don't show it to people.
But they already made it.
I definitely agree with you guys, and this is something we've been saying on the podcast for a long time. Like, it's just much better with game development because of how much things change from early conceptual stage to actual development stage, and the barriers you come across and things that you thought you'd be able to do that you can't do. And just how much things change in game development versus even other mediums. Like, films are the same way, but not nearly, I think, to the same extent. Yeah. So it's just better overall to announce when the thing is in late development stage. It's pretty much set in stone. This is what it's going to play like and look like. I think that the fear of something being leaked, to me... well, there was... I think it was Rage 2... which was shown at E3 in Bethesda's conference. That was leaked beforehand, right? And I love the way Bethesda sort of played with that, right? I think they tweeted at Walmart some sort of joke about
Walmart Canada
not being able to keep secrets or something like that. You know,
they were like, thanks, guys.
They kind of just played along with it and rolled with the punches. Yeah. But it's much better to do that than it is to announce something and give people a certain expectation and then not fulfill that expectation year after year, and it destroys the trust of your consumer base.
That's the biggest part, because it's like a short-term solution. Like, in the short term, let's just announce it now. Like, that's a short-term fix, right? But if you know your game's like 5 years out, and it's like, whoa, you just shot yourself in the foot. Let that crap be leaked, man. Don't like jump up ahead, because if it gets leaked, people are understanding when the game takes a while. It's like, oh, they didn't even mean to show us that. Like, we weren't supposed to see that. The company, it's too early in development. But when they show it, when they're like, boom, here's this sweet game, we're not telling you when it comes out, but buy a PS4 now because it's PS4. It's, and it's like, now that might not even be true. That's where you lose trust.
Because Sony was it was during Sony's press conference that it was announced, right? And they said coming first
PS4 exclusive
to the PlayStation 4. Well, not exclusive, but coming first.
First,
right. Yeah. So the sentiment set was, this is coming to the PlayStation 4, and that's not. It's not like that's not like that. There's no way it's going to be PS5 for sure, and it won't come on the PS4. But it's looking more and more likely that it could happen that way. Yeah. Because, like you said, according to Nomura in these interviews, it's the development's coming along very well. Like it's progressing nicely.
Yeah, he said
They
he's
just
surprised. Yeah.
they just wanted to focus this year at E3 on Kingdom Hearts 3, which I think is smart because
Right, that's what Nintendo does now.
that game's coming out sooner,
Yeah.
and you want to, kind of focus on that and build people's hype for that. And then, since Final Fantasy VII wouldn't be released until after that, that's well into 2019 at the earliest. Like, just wait till next year and then focus on that. That makes total sense to me. I'm totally on board with that. It's just that, I don't know. I think that when you announce that early, like we've been saying, don't do that. That's usually bad. But if you're going to, then the only way to keep people, I guess, excited and positive and keep things exciting around that title, you should be a little bit more transparent in the process. Let people know how it's coming along. So that they don't start to fear that there's something wrong, which is inevitable. If you haven't heard anything for 3 years since the game was announced, and you're just like sitting there wondering, people are going to begin speculating something is wrong, and you don't want people talking like that. So, anyways, yeah, I agree with him. It was announced too early, and I disagree with Square's reasoning for announcing it, and I don't think it's the whole truth because like you said, Case, and I think it was mostly because they wanted people buying PS4s as the launch of Final Fantasy 15 was
which once again, short-term solution with long-term implications.
Yeah.
Like, and if this was a first-time thing, whatever, but Final Fantasy Versus 13 was already announced. People bought a PS3 because that's where it was supposed to show up, and it ended up being Final Fantasy 15 for the PS4. And it was like, that they already messed up. You can forgive that because they didn't realize whatever things obviously got messed up in development, but they're doing it again. And at this point, it's like, no, fool me once, whatever, but fool me twice. Like I can't. It's my fault. I can't trust you.
That's what they need to avoid.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to?
Hopefully they listen to our
topic. I hope so too. Okay. Well, good topic there. Let's move on to our first question of the day from one of our audience members. This one comes from Price Everett. Price asks, if given the opportunity, what kind of game would you make? What's a general story idea you've had churning in your head? I'm sure this question has been asked before, but I give you this stipulation. It cannot be a traditional turn-based RPG. It has to be a game in another genre, maybe a fighting game or a platformer. Can't wait to hear your thoughts. Keep up the great work. So, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Hold on one second. Derek, have you ever thought about making a game before?
Are you kidding? I actually went to game design school for a little while with the intention of becoming a game designer, and then, look where that got me.
Yeah, and well, now you talk about games, so that's kind of the same thing.
It's almost related, yeah. It's almost tangentially like within the same like realm of the same thing, right?
Yeah, same like topic.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that I've had this dream idea of like a game churning around in my head for like 15 years or so. But so this guy says that he doesn't want it to be a strictly turn-based RPG though. So I wonder, does that mean that action RPGs are off the table? And if so, how about
no.
I would say action RPGs are on the table, just not turn-based RPGs.
So yeah, I'll tell y'all my amazing idea for an RPG, and you guys can steal it and make this game because I want it to happen, even if I'm not the one who brings it to you.
Nice.
So the concept of this game is actually it's a now this was conceptualized back when zombies were still in vogue. So it's
15 years ago.
Yeah, 15 years ago. So this takes place in a school where the whole school has been zombified essentially, and you're playing as a protagonist who's trying to go through the school and rescue people who are not zombies, and some of those people you could add to your roster of characters you could play as, and others that you would be fighting against that were zombified. You'd have to actually go off and mark them off of like a yearbook for the school.
So it's like a checklist.
Yeah, and you'd have to go through the entire
pretty cool.
like each area would have like their own big boss, like
Yeah.
the swimming pool area would have probably some sort of water type enemy, giant boss that you would fight there. There'd probably be one in the gymnasium that would probably have
Yeah.
some like gym teacher that was, super buff or whatever and tough to
Yeah.
fight. And you could also have like in your party like a nerdy type who makes stuff out of like chemistry sets or whatever that you find around chemical supplies. So that would be pretty rad, I think. That's my dream.
That's really cool. That's really unique. That's something you're not going to hear everybody. I'd make a fantasy RPG, or I'd make this or that. Like my answers. But that's actually really cool. That's a really cool idea. I like that.
I think
Uh,
it's good.
how about you, Case? What would you
So
make?
I've
What
got
game would you
like
make?
sports kind of stuff. So for a long time, at least 15 years for me too, I guess. I've been thinking about making like a basketball game, but it would have a lot of RPG elements. Um, and you would be controlling a specific character, but it would be more or less like a life simulator, not so much like the game is essentially a sports game. You are an athlete, you play basketball, you start out like in college or high school or wherever, right? And you go through your whole career playing the sport, but actually playing the sport is only like gosh, this will be a lot like the Persona games the more I think about it. But when you go to the dungeons in Persona, that's a decent part of the game, but a probably bigger part of the game is going to school, meeting people, making friends, doing all that kind of just living a normal life. So essentially be
Mm,
Persona, but basketball. And you go and you play your basketball games and you allocate your resources here and there. And you go to different classes and you build different friendships. And then you try and get drafted. And then, your career kind of goes wherever it goes. So it could potentially be a very long game.
Wow.
But there you go. That's what I've got. A life simulator, but you're a basketball player. And I've had thoughts about exactly how to implement like the basketball game, because I don't want it to be like the like EA or the 2K, the way those games are played. I think those games are great. But I recently have seen a little bit of like slam dunk manga that was done in an anime style.
mm,
And it's really cool. And it made me wonder, what if when you're facing off against somebody like, one on one, it is kind of like an RPG system, right? Where they can block, or, there's some action timed events, but you've got to do everything right. But it takes you into the zone where you've got to get past your defenders in essentially a turn-based RPG fashion. I don't know how that would work. I have no idea if that would be exciting or fun or anything like that. But I think it would be pretty cool.
It'd probably be the only sports game I'd play.
There you go. There you go.
Just want to do a quick shout out here. We missed a super chat a little earlier from Herpaderp, who is
Herpaderp.
A big supporter of the channel. So thank you, Herpaderp. But also to
Thank
Idris
you.
Hatef here, who says, "You mean Barkley? Shut up and jam Gaiden," which is a
Wait,
game
is that-
we must shout out to Barkley. Shut up and jam Gaiden, which is
Absolutely.
one of the great RPGs of our time.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so
Oh man.
I have
Basketball
had
Story. It's just like Golf Story, but basketball. I
but
love
basketball version. There
it.
you
Yeah.
go. So for me, like, I don't necessarily have a story idea to go with this game idea that I would love to play. But I've wanted a sword fighting game that's like, because like in most I would say my favorite like melee combat in an action style adventure game or even like RPG is Dark Souls, right? Just like the weight and the movement and the rolling and dodging and deflecting and attacking, the way that the both of the arms that you use are tied to the shoulder buttons, like the layout. I really love that, but I want a game where like you don't hit a guy with a sword or an axe or like something like 17 times before he dies. You're just
I
like
know, that's so
slicing through this guy
frustrating.
like a million times, right?
Yeah.
I would like a game where you have like a similar sort of feel to like fencing style sword choreography in films,
Hmm.
where there's these long drawn out like sword fighting scenes and the swords are clashing and they're just back and forth.
Yeah.
They're not hitting each other and slicing each other up.
They're not like
They're
losing HP.
deflecting. And
Yeah.
if there was a system that could be created where the idea is to not to hit the enemy until he's dead, but to break through the enemy's sort of like defense with the sword,
Right.
like
Find openings or something like that.
yeah, and then get through. And once you hit him, you got him. Like you sliced him and you killed him. But it's like it's a process. It's like the battles are drawn out and they feel very exciting. And there's a lot of like fencing style going on. I think that maybe the closest thing I've seen to that is the way that they did combat in For Honor, where they sort of had, you sort of had a direction that you would block, and the attack's coming from this side, and you'd have to move the stick over there to block from that side. So I think For Honor it was kind of on the right track, but I would want, I don't know, I would want something a little bit more stylish than that. Say the way that the sword fighting is done in Crisis Core between Sephiroth and Genesis when they're fighting in the simulation, and it's just like when they carry through with their swords and they deflect, they don't like bounce back, but they still just carry all the way through. So it's just this really really intense crossing of swords. I'd really like to see a game that does just very cinematic fencing style sword combat, kind of like one-on-one between two characters, and maybe you advance to become like the greatest swordsman in the land or something.
Yeah, that would be the hardest part about a game like that, would be that if it's going to be that technical, it has to be one-on-one. There's no way you could fight two people and have that type of precision with blocks.
Exactly.
What did you think of the Ghost of Tsushima trailer at the PS4?
It looks sweet, and my favorite part was the part where he sort of like sizes up that Mongolian guy, and he comes running at him, and he just like wham, just like slices straight through him in one attack. Like that was cool. Freaking awesome, like on the draw. That was my favorite part of the trailer. But I also really liked, actually, no, I did like the part where they were in sort of like that arena of like red leaves on the ground, and he was sort of going at it with that other character. That one-on-one sword combat there, that was very cool. Very cool. It's very promising as well. So I am looking forward to seeing how that works for sure.
Seemed really methodic, very cinematic, like you were describing.
Yeah, you're right. So I am very excited for Ghost of Tsushima. You're right. To see how that works out. But yeah, I know that like there are probably some games I haven't tried, that like Way of the Samurai.
People mentioning Bushido Blade,
Way of the Samurai,
Sekiro, maybe
things of that nature that I could probably try out. I know that there's also a fighting game that people had mentioned, because I've talked about this idea in a much earlier podcast. But there was a fighting game where like the idea was one pierce or like one slice, the guy is dead basically. So there's not like health bars, right?
So you have to play way more conservative. Yeah,
I just don't remember what it was called, but people had sort of mentioned that before. But
the one that comes to my mind is just Rainbow Six, but that's not with swords. So.
Yeah.
But Rainbow Six is similar, where it's like you get shot in the arm, and there's like, I don't know, depending on where you get shot, you could be done in one hit.
Right, and it affects also your ability.
Yeah, and then you can't move as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would want in it too. So like, if you get cut on like the freaking leg, you're not dead. You're just like limping around. It hampers your movement or ability to dodge or whatever. Like that would be really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this would have to basically not be an RPG to work, in my opinion. I think anytime you're affecting stats, it kind of takes away from the idea that it's about developing a skill or an ability to read an enemy block, like see where they're coming and then find their openings.
Totally.
So it'd have to be an action game, more something skill focused than stat focused. So, anyways,
all right,
that would be my pick. That'd be the kind of game I'd want to play. Okay. Thank you for the question, Price Everett. Appreciate it. Let's move on now to Christopher Guin, who asks, suppose a game writer comes to you with a dilemma. They're trying to write a game plot that does not end with the fate of the entire world hanging in the balance, so that the story feels grounded and relatable, but they have no idea how else to raise the stakes for the last act. How do you write a game plot that feels like it builds to a huge climax without relying on, say, an invading army from the moon?
I love that, by the way. Love that. Oh,
Derek,
geez.
any thoughts on how to keep the stakes high but the scale small?
Yeah. Well,
Mm,
I think that we could borrow from a lot of other mediums uh, inspiration for this sort of thing. Like even just like an action movie, for instance, most of the time, the world doesn't hang in the balance. Sometimes you get, the meteors crashing toward Earth, but usually the big bad
right.
guy of the movie is going to be something a little more relatable, like Hans Gruber from Die Hard, right?
There you go. Perfect.
Just trying to get away, and he's slighted the hero in some way, right? So not everything has to really get that high stakes to be really interesting. All I think it really needs, it doesn't have to be the world at stake, but maybe a figurative world for the hero, for the person who the game is following, like something that means
Yeah.
the world to them.
Which to
Hmm.
which I actually have a thought about that. Um, Games like maybe The Witcher 3, although that's not one that I've just am aware that this is maybe part of it, or Red Dead Redemption or something where it's like your family is involved,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, however it may be that, they have your daughter or something, like the movie Taken or something like that. It's like, okay, the stakes don't necessarily need to be higher than that because
Yeah.
that's important to you. So I like that you put it that way.
Hmm.
And
Any further
especially
thoughts
given
on
what
that?
Christopher Gwynn is saying, he said they are having trouble writing the last act. So it's like I don't know if you can go back and rewrite the whole story and make it
Yeah.
just like your family's in trouble. But yeah, that might be a little bit much. But that's a start.
I think that if they start writing it, with the intention of using this as a device, then they could probably do that. And it doesn't have to be a family, it could be something like, I don't know, something as just precious to the hero, like, maybe an amulet or something that like a family
Yeah,
keepsake. I don't
the
know, but
crystal shards. Yeah,
yeah, something that is important to them that you have to, like, introduce it and build it up. You have to build up the importance of it over time, right?
yeah,
Yeah. For me, like I've been watching over the last year or so, like all of the Star Trek series. I'm currently on Deep Space Nine, season 6. And while those stories tend to have sort of an overarching plot that is generally like galaxy wide possible ending destruction, like the Borg
yeah,
invasion or the Dominion invasion or something like that, what they do really well, because you guys are right, like it's about when you're trying to keep the stakes high, but you're wanting to move smaller scale. Generally, the first thing you think of is okay, family, relationships, things that are very important on a personal level, right? Christopher Nolan tries to do this in a lot of his movies, and while I love Christopher Nolan, this tends to be the weaker part of his stories for me. Is that he's telling a story
mm,
like Interstellar or Inception, where it's about some really cool or crazy philosophical idea or scientific principle, like the way that time is bent when you get really close to a black hole or something like that. But he tries to sort of also tie in this like human relationship element with a father daughter or husband wife or something like that.
yeah. That's often
Um,
a theme.
and so it's like, ooh, the personal stakes for the character are about losing the family member and not being able to see the family member again or whatever it is.
Right.
Um, and so like in his case, I like his grand ideas a lot better than his smaller scale ones. I think they're better executed. But I think another way to do it is to ask really interesting personal questions. For instance, in Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, there's an episode where Tuvok and Neelix are on a planet, and then they get beamed back to the ship. These are two characters who are throughout the series kind of at odds. They're opposites in personality, and they sort of butt heads a little bit. They get beamed back to the ship, and they are melded into one person. But the idea is that this is actually a new person. This isn't like both people exist in one. It's like this is an entirely new being. And the entire time they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we separate them and then, bring them back as their original selves again? But the question that ends up being asked in the episode is it right to kill essentially this new person in order to save two people that we knew really well, that we cared about, that were part of our crew, right? That had relationships. Neelix had, a relationship with a woman on the ship, and like she didn't know how to feel about this new person. It wasn't the same person anymore. And so ultimately the stakes are for this character is about like, this is a new life, a new person. Do we destroy this person to get the people we want? Or is our leaning towards doing that just because we had close relationships? Should we be letting go of those people and accepting this new person?
It sounds oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It sounds not too far removed from the classic thought experiment of the railroad track, where you have if you do nothing, it will hit like 12 people, but if you flip the switch, it'll only hit one person on the track, right? It sounds kind of like,
but you have to actively
physically move it. Yes.
So in one case, the people are just dying, and it's like, oh, nothing I could do. But in the other case, it's like, no, you are killing somebody.
Yeah.
Well, what does that do to the human psyche? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another example from Deep Space Nine that I really liked was, and this kind of gets more into the familial relationship, kind of side of things like you guys were talking about. There's an episode where Cisco, in an accident, is basically like phased out of sort of like I don't know what to call it. It's like a temporal anomaly. So he's like phased out of time, basically. So his son like grows up, and occasionally Cisco will sort of like phase back, and he's like, the same as he was. For him, like only like minutes have passed, but it's been like 10 years or 15 years or whatever.
Right.
And so he's just very periodically will come back and get to interact with his son again. And his son uses his entire life sort of like disregarding his passions, ambitions, his relationships, and working his entire life to bring his father back until he's an old man. He's wasted his entire life just trying to get his dad back and not living, right? So I think that there are lots and lots of stories you can tell that get real personal and ask personal questions about like, how do we let go of people that we care about and learn how to live our lives, and live our lives the way that will make us the most happy. How do we, or should we, the railroad experiment, like you're saying. There are lots of interesting sort of questions like that you can ask in your story that can have very high stakes for the people involved, but that don't necessarily need to involve like a world-ending threat. Because the problem with that is that we get continual like escalation. It's especially with the way that everything has to have a million sequels nowadays. It has to become a franchise.
Yeah.
And if you're telling a grand epic story and that's your first game or your first movie or first whatever, it's like, how do we raise the stakes next time? It's got to be even greater threat. So you go from the world being at risk to all of a sudden we get to Avengers Infinity War, whatever the latest one, where it's like freaking like half the galaxy's population, Yeah. So it's a big problem. Anime with like a Dragon Ball has like a huge problem with that. Huge problem.
Naruto had a similar problem.
It's like what's beyond Super Saiyan? Super Saiyan 2, Super Saiyan 3, Super Saiyan 5. Okay, we're getting too high in numbers. We got to go Super Saiyan God. We got it's got to keep escalating forever. And it starts to get really silly. Whereas I think in a lot of cases you could pull back and ask more personal questions, and the stakes can still be very high. So
I'm still trying to think of how I could possibly work in a moral dilemma into a turn-based combat system.
Oh, that's a good question.
Very good question. Anyways, anything else you guys want to
No,
add to
no.
that question?
I think
Good
we covered
question.
it super well.
Good question, Chris. Thanks for
Mm.
asking. You're a beast. Okay, this next one comes from Messiah21. A little bit of context here. As I've gotten older, the evolution of battle systems away from the older, slower ATB/turn-based systems has almost solely kept me interested in RPGs. So he likes the fact that they've been getting away from that. I
Hmm.
can still play the classics, but modern RPGs like Bravely Default or Xenoblade Chronicles hold my interest more because of the difference in the battle system.
Hmm.
I prefer something with a faster pace. I enjoyed FF10 more than FF10 for this reason. Or some
Whoa, this
strategy
guy's a
element.
minority opinion. Wow.
Or some strategy element like storing attacks or fully controlling a single character, Xenoblade and Star Ocean. I feel the battle system and progression is really central. I've had a hard time getting through RPGs with decent stories that had slow and dated battle systems, while on the other hand, I've enjoyed some with ho-hum stories that had a really decent battle system and level progression. I put Bravely Default here, he says.
Hmm.
If it hasn't been asked yet, what do you think of RPG battle systems? Where are they headed, and what elements over the years have kept you from feeling fatigue at hitting the same buttons over and over?
Oh, jeez. That's a
Okay,
good question.
Derek, why don't you lead us off? What do you think?
Well, I I hate to say it, but I think that the direction that that RPGs are seem to be going right now are probably going to make this guy pretty happy because it seems like things are kind of moving toward action based
Yeah.
combat more often, and we've
Oh,
seen
yeah.
this with the last few Final Fantasy titles, excluding 13 and 14, I guess, where 12 was very it was kind of played more like an MMO, and now 15 is very much action
A little bit.
RPG, and the 7 remake is also very much an action RPG. So and that's kind of too bad because that's kind of the opposite of how I feel
Mm-hmm.
as a huge fan of turn-based
Yeah.
RPG. But
So, Derek, what are the elements that keep that turn-based system from getting old for you then?
that's
Or does
that's
it not need
I
that?
think I think it just doesn't need that because so I
Right.
know that if a game is engaging, like you shouldn't just be tapping the same button over and over. And the only
Right.
game in recent memory that's actually had me do that was when I recently replayed through Mystic Quest, where I was like,
Mm.
okay, I'm gonna reach for the turbo controller, right?
Yeah.
Just hold
Yeah.
down
Yep.
X. But I think that a well-designed game won't allow the player to just do that for you. Like Octopath Traveler, for instance, if you get a little careless, you could have your butt handed to you like I did during the demo.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, the first demo, yeah.
yeah, you well, even the second demo.
Oh, well, sure, sure, sure.
But I did get a little careless, and the game reminded me that I need to pay
Uh,
attention to it.
Mm,
So,
right.
so I think that as long as, you're okay with games demanding your full attention, then that's what game developers should be, uh, striving for, I think.
Yeah. I have made a few videos on this in recent times, and it's true that to a large extent we're seeing RPGs trying to move in the direction of like action, where you're controlling one character, it's in real time. Um, the issue the issue with this is that the more in that direction you go, the less control you're going to be able to have with a party, right? The
yep.
reason why combat systems like this work in Dark Souls is because you control one guy. That's it. If but with traditional JRPGs, the entire concept is around building a team of characters that complement each other's weaknesses, and that you can use strategically. And that element is going to be lost the more you move into a fast paced
Mhm.
action direction. Now, his example with Final Fantasy X-2 is one of the best examples, probably the prime example that I have personally played, where you have just the right amount of speed to keep it really fast paced while also allowing full control over the entire party and having that element of strategy, being able to switch classes in the battle, for instance, gaining the abilities that you want to have in certain fights, and having access to them at any time. Like Final Fantasy X-2 is probably it's probably, like I said, the best example of having the best of both worlds. But you can't run those characters around in the battlefield. Like you're not like running around and hitting a button for a certain attack, and then also, because it's impossible. Imagine trying to control 3 characters simultaneously in Dark Souls. Like, just like imagine running around this way with this guy, running around to that side with that guy, casting a spell with this guy while you're also hacking away with this guy, blocking the attack or dodging the attack with this guy who's about to get hit. It is too much for the brain to handle. Our brains it's not possible, right? So if you're going full action, you have to control one person. And the appeal, I feel, to those old JRPGs was the cast, like the party element to it. You had all these cool characters, and you could customize each one of them the way that you wanted them to be if there was a class system in the game, or even just, I want to bring this character with me into the fight because I like that they have this and this ability. So you would customize the party you wanted with the characters that you wanted. You would strategize, you would equip them, do all kinds of things, and then you had perfect control in battle over what each and every character does. So the appeal to that system I disagree to a large extent with the premise of the question, in that it's dated or that it's slow. I would say that it's not attempting to be exciting in the same way that you're looking for. And I was very much the same way when I first picked up Final Fantasy VII, which was my first RPG. Right. I was like, why is he just waiting there for the guy to shoot him? Like, why can't I move over there and hit him with the sword? I didn't.
The one that got me is you can't jump. You can't tell your character to jump as you walk around the levels. There's no jump button. I was like, what the heck?
Same when I was playing Earthbound for the first time. I was like, okay, I've got my cracked bat, go to play it and run into an enemy and like swing. Where? How do you swing your bat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because I guess I didn't have any concept of the abstraction there, right?
Right.
Like, and so when I learned to sort of, and I'm not saying this in any way to be condescending towards Messiak. Like, I'm not saying that you don't understand this or anything like that. I'm just trying to sort of like give a different perspective for everyone who's watching, right? When I sort of shifted my mindset and realized I'm not supposed to take this literally. I'm not supposed to literally think that the battle played out with Cloud standing there poised like this,
shot with like
waiting to get shot and then going and attacking him. It's just an abstract system that's meant to represent there was a chaotic battle, and you're supposed to imagine it plays out like it does in Advent Children or something like that. Right. But this is the only way that you get to have full control over all your characters, right? So you have to use the abstraction to imagine a little bit how that battle played out, but I get to control all of my characters versus having a more realistically presented battle where your characters are completely controlled by the computer. I think that the huge draw for people who loved those old games was full party control. And so when you see games like Final Fantasy, the newer ones, getting away from that, that's the trouble people have. And I think that Square Enix for a long time has been trying to find that sweet spot in the middle where you can have full control in a sense, like with the Gambit system in Final Fantasy XII, where you can tell the computer what it should do in any situation. And you can also pause the battle if you want and switch to that character, but it's really designed, I think, with the pace of the game to be something where those are handled by the computer and by the gambits, and you just kind of control one character. Yeah. So I think that the way that it's headed is just going to be dependent on what the goal of the developer is. Obviously, Atlas, a lot of RPGs they're producing now, they're very much still in the older way
Yeah.
of thinking. They
They're
want full
dedicated.
party control.
Yeah.
And you think of Persona, it's all about like the characters, right? People getting
Yeah.
invested in those characters. So full party control makes complete sense there.
Slight caveat for Persona 3.
I haven't played Persona 3.
What?
So yeah, it really just depends on the goals of the developers. And I think that, as long as the intent is we want this to be just a fast-paced feel, and we want this to feel very exciting, then it makes complete sense to just forget the idea of a party setup or controlling a whole party and focus on a party and focus on a character. That's probably a better way to go. And if you have a game that's really focused on characters, then maybe it's a good idea to think about, using abstraction so you can control everybody. But
yeah. I'd agree with that. I don't get fatigue at hitting with the same buttons over and over as long as there's strategy involved. I mean, there's only so much. No matter what game you're playing, you're hitting the same buttons over and over, right? As long as it's strategic as to when you push the buttons and where you are pushing them and all that stuff, then I don't really get fatigue. I don't really mind it at all. But it's true that the RPG genre is going, it's going Kingdom Hearts route, which in some ways is fun, but in other ways is like, I don't know. It's almost like it's harder to tell I don't know. Maybe this is just a subjective, thinking on my part, but I feel like it's harder to tell a good story when the action is like that than an RPG because it's so literal. And the RPG, like you mentioned before, it gives way for abstraction. It gives room for the imagination to kind of do what it does, just like reading a book. Whereas an action game is like, no, this is literally what's happening. You're just watching it. There's no, this is it. And sometimes I kind of miss the abstraction.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of a conversation that's been happening among like video game critics since for like nearly 2 decades now, right?
Yeah, probably about.
People criticize RPGs for being turn-based. It's like, well, that's just the genre of game it is,
man. Yeah.
It's like chess. You don't I don't know. It's funny. Do you get fatigue at doing the same chess moves over and over because you can only do an L and the rook can only go straight? But it's like, no, that's just the rules of the system, and don't change chess. Don't make it an action RPG. Keep it how it is. It's fine. It's fine how it is.
Imagine trying to control all of the chess pieces.
See, then you got to pick one, and you have a gambit system for all the others.
Exactly. You have a gambit set up for all of your chess pieces. I'm going to control the queen.
Dude, that would take so long to set up.
Dude, got to make a freaking chess game with a gambit system now. That's the game I want to make. Going back to the previous question, that's what I want.
Yeah,
chess with a gambit system.
I love it.
Anyways, yeah, good question, Messiah. I think that you, being the type of player you are who like faster paced battle systems, you're probably going to like the direction that a lot of RPG console AAA RPGs are going. I think that when we're talking about AAA console RPGs, they're going to be trying to be fast paced and exciting. They're going to prioritize that, whereas handheld or smaller RPGs, that they'll probably kind of stick more to the other side. So
they'll keep it alive.
Anyways, thank you for the question. Appreciate you. Moving on now to Xylon 73. So I'm currently playing through Golden Sun: The Last Age. Dude, I love Golden Sun. And there is a section in the game where you get a boat, and the game essentially goes, all right, here are some vague goals that you have to figure out. Go and explore this giant sea and find stuff. It's extremely open-ended. You can do all sorts of stuff in whatever order you want. Golden Sun is no stranger to this. In the third game, a similar thing happens near the end. And even in the first game, there's some degree of choice as to what you do in what order. This got me thinking about the zones versus open world video you made a bit ago, Mike, and I was wondering, what do you think about this idea, having not all of the game, but just parts of it, in this case, the middle act, be open worldish? Just some large overarching goals, and you have to put the pieces together and figure out the path. Some pros include freedom of exploration, while some cons include lack of story dialogue for a while. And while it does happen, it tends to be lots of it. I think this could be an interesting way for linear stories to still have more exploration focus. Also, he says, vote for Golden Sun patrons.
Of course.
Okay. So,
Final Fantasy
anybody else have
15
thoughts
did
on
this a
this?
little bit, right?
Yeah, we're gonna dive into 15 in a minute. But do you guys have anything you want to say first before we dive into that?
Oh,
I don't I get the idea, but I don't like it. I feel like games that you think you're playing a certain game and it changes, a lot of times that's
Oh shoot, we're losing you, Kason. You still there, Derek?
oh yeah, I'm here.
Okay, hold on. This happens sometimes. His internet connection is spotty because he's got satellite.
Oh,
Okay, Kason, you there? Darn. Okay, why don't you go first, Derek? We'll see if he can connect with us again.
sure. Well, I think that you've got two different people that you're going to have to sell this idea to. First, of course, being the gamers, but also second being the developers who are going to be spending a lot of time making this open world game for it to only be available to to that player for a relatively short amount of time.
Mm,
Because I mean, when we're talking about developing an open world, you have to populate it with not only a large space, but a meaningful space full of interactions that mean something. And just making an open world for the player, it's an intensive process. Well, if you're going to do it right, anyway.
mm,
Uh, for selling it to a player, though, I think that the problem that you're going to run into there is that there's a lot of completionists out there who are going
mm-hmm.
to really not be happy when you take that open world away from them in the final act and suddenly they can't, go collect whatever 100th piece of the puzzle that they were looking for was, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but it also, I think, really depends on how it is handled. I feel like if um, if it's handled in a really delicate way, like if it was maybe used in tandem with abstraction, it would probably help avoid the problem that you were running into with when your discussion video where the world feels smaller. Like maybe if you
Sure.
had this section of world that the story forced you to cross maybe on foot rather than in like a vehicle, and then you get to your destination and then you get your vehicle back and then you can return to abstraction. You can zoom back out and you can see that
Yeah.
this large expanse of space was just a tiny portion of the world. Like, maybe then that would be a little bit of a better way to handle it all in all, but, I don't know, but I'd have to probably play it first and see how I felt about it.
Do you know how freaking sweet it would be if you had like a traditional overworld, but with a push of a button, you could like zoom down and then it became like a freaking like open world style game. You could run around in it like that, but then you like press the button, you go back out again to the
Like,
overworld and you can
map.
traverse it really fast. That'd be freaking awesome.
That
that
would
would
be
be
pretty
Kason,
rad.
Kason's back with us.
I'm back, sorry.
You'll
I hope you
probably,
got my point. I don't
uh,
like it, but I can
we
see its
should,
utility.
oh, okay. Yeah, basically that was it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, my I don't have an issue with the idea as long as it makes sense within the story. For me, whether the style of game they choose, whether we're going with open world or linear, for me it needs to be made not just with the idea of, oh, I want to make an open world game, or I want to make I don't want to, or whatever. I like it or I don't like it. Like, especially with RPGs, right, where story is a pretty integral part of it. Let's take Final Fantasy 15 and The Witcher 3 as like as examples of this, right? The story of Final Fantasy 15 is one in which a prince is on the run from an empire who's chasing after him. He's trying to, make it to is it Altisha? I think is the name of the place where he's going to meet with his fiance. Trying to keep a low profile while collecting these weapons of his ancestors or whatever, like gaining the power that he needs to sort of like get the crystal back, right? To me, that premise really, and this was true of the game when it was Final Fantasy Versus 13, that premise really dictates a more linear style of storytelling, one with a lot of urgency to get to the next place quickly. There's just a lot there that suggests to me I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. I need to get things done. Let's get moving to the next objective and get it done quickly. We got to get moving here. An open world invites the player to take their time, to take in the sights, go look around, explore, find NPCs and talk to them, take side quests, fulfill those side quests. A lot of those turn out to be very menial side quests, like please go grocery shopping for me. Would you mind going and picking up the part so I can fix my car? Right. They're asking the prince of their nation to do this, by the way. Prince of your nation comes up like, yo, could you please go across the continent and get some onions for me? Man, I don't have time to do that.
Can you imagine asking Donald Trump that?
Yeah, it's just like story and world construction are not cohesive. They don't really go together. It's being done because they were trying to appeal to the West. The West has lots of open world games. It's a very popular style right now, and that's ultimately why I think they did it. Whereas a linear style of storytelling in that game would have made a lot more sense. Now, let's contrast this with The Witcher 3, which is a game about finding someone and you don't know where they are. A needle in a haystack situation. What better world construction can you think of than open world for that? The entire idea is you're going out to explore and ask people, try to find clues, trying to locate someone you don't have any idea where to start. You've just heard rumors about them. Like, absolutely, an open world now fits within the story they're trying to tell there. And it can lead to lots of, well, I'll give you the information you want if you do something for me in return. And yeah, right? Like, it leads into that really naturally, I feel. Versus the alternate, which doesn't make any sense, like we were just discussing. So, for me, it's all about whether or not the story is going to justify the open-ended portion of the game we're coming to. Xylon, we had talked about Golden Sun's dialogue in a previous podcast. He had asked a question about that. I haven't had a chance to play Golden Sun in many, many years. So I'd have to actually play what you're playing and sort of like refresh my memory to comment on that specifically. But I do think that there are ways to pull it off, as long as the story justifies it, is what I'm trying to get at.
That works, man.
Anything else? Do you guys have any more thoughts on that?
I don't. Although there's one game where I actually really liked it, but this is the problem I typically have when this kind of thing happens. It was True Crime Streets of LA, which is one of the games I always talk about here, because the first like 2 levels, you can't go wherever you want. You're Nick, Kang, and Chang or whatever. You've got to go in and fight people, right? But on level 3, that's when it's like, okay, there's a goal here, but you can kind of go wherever you want and do whatever you want, and you can, run over people or get into car crashes or steal people's cars or shoot people or get the cops to follow you. You can do all that kind of stuff like Grand Theft Auto style. But the thing is, I don't think I ever actually beat that game, because once I got to that point, I didn't then want to go back to the linear story. I wanted to do that now. So that whole game for me was just driving around, either being a good guy or being a pretty bad guy. But either way, that's what the whole game became for me. And so when a game changes that drastically, it's going to have to change back at some point, and I'm not going to like that.
Yep. Yep. That is the risk you run into, as well as, like, a lot of times with open world games, you want the player to feel the freedom to explore. But a lot of times you'll get to a point where it's like, if you do this, you won't be able to go back. And then they feel like, oh...
Then it's like, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, right. Like,
I'll just spend my whole life in this game.
I enjoyed the open, free aspect of this. I don't want to be locked into this section, So it can kind of feel, like two things that are at odds if it's not done the right way. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
Especially if one part appeals more. If one part's better than the other, then it's like, well, just make the game that thing. Instead, it's like you've got a less preferable part to a more preferable part, and people are going to prefer one to the other.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's impossible, but it is tricky. Okay. Thank you, Xylon73. Let's hope the patrons vote for Golden Sun. Doesn't look like they're going to so far. Looks like they're all over Vagrant Story.
Maybe one day.
But
Vagrant Story is great, though.
Vagrant Story is amazing. Oh, speaking of games with smaller scale and high stakes, Vagrant Story is a very good example.
That one's
Vagrant
like
Story is
pretty
an excellent example.
Yeah. Pretty well contained.
Santiago Villa Reverte, or maybe Villa. I don't know how they pronounce it in different parts of South America. Okay.
I think it's Villa.
I think it's Villa as well. Is it possible that Nintendo would leave the console market and just focus on making games? I know the subject has been brought up many times because it makes more financial sense. I mean, games for iOS and Android is the first step. So, if they have a say in it, the answer is no. Obviously, they want to make hardware, but do we think that there's a chance that this could happen?
And people, if no one buys their consoles, then yeah. But when you talk about does it make financial sense, or because it makes more financial sense, I don't think it does, in the sense that they can make iOS or Android games if they want to, but they don't have to stop making their own hardware to do that.
Yeah.
What obviously makes the most financial sense for them at the moment is still making consoles, because they keep making them. And if you look at the 3DS, which has sold like 70 or 80 million units, and the Switch is killing it, like that's a lot of money. That's more money than if they'd sold that equivalent amount of games, right? Because their margins are higher on consoles. At least they eventually become higher after the console's been out for a while, which is when most of the sales happen. So anyways, I'd say no, but it's possible that at some point when everything's all touch screen or virtual reality like crazy, that Nintendo has to kind of leave that space, that they'll do it. But their IPs are so valuable that if they have a little exclusive machine that can only play their games, people want to play their games. And so they can make that work for 100 years.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they talk about lucrative business opportunities for Nintendo, they fail to take into consideration like the money they're making for like licensing the ability to play games on those consoles. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
they're taking a cut from every game that sells on the Switch, not just first party titles. So, so what is more lucrative, making just your own games or making money on all the games?
All the games that appear on your console because of the licensing. That's a very good point. The licensing is a big factor.
I think their licensing fees were cut in half from what they used to be.
Oh no, Casey, we're losing you again. They're cut in half from what they used to be. Okay, you're back now. So you said they were cut in half from what they used to be.
Yeah, so Nintendo is incentivizing companies to develop for the Switch now by offering, monetary incentive essentially. So their licensing fees aren't as high as they used to be. Back in the 90s, it was like really crazy. Third-party developers hated developing for Nintendo because of how costly it was, and they had to do cartridges and all that stuff. But now Nintendo's slowly like, okay, we're gonna not do that as much, but they still do take some money. So
yeah. So there's a huge part of the business that I think a lot of people might not realize. It's not just about the hardware. It's like because like you were alluding to, Case, and at least early on in a console's life, the hardware itself is sometimes sold at a loss or just basically breaking even or barely breaking even. It doesn't like make a lot of profit, but it does provide a platform to which they can now license and take money from all the games that appear on the platform, right? So anyways, I don't think that we will see that happen. We have seen them go through highs and lows. Numerous times we've had the consoles that sold great, then consoles that didn't sell well. They rebounded with a console that sold great again. The console that didn't sell well.
That's how they work, man.
They have room to fail on hardware, the hardware side. They have a lot of capital. They have very, very valuable intellectual properties.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that we're going to see Nintendo get out of the hardware
Yeah.
market for a long time.
Here's the funny thing. Nintendo is worth almost as much as a company as Sony is worth. It's around 35 billion, something like that. And Sony does so much more than just make video games.
Yep.
Yet somehow Nintendo, that basically just makes video games, is worth as much as Sony, which is, making money off of televisions and, their CD, DVD technologies and all that kind of stuff. Like they make everything Sony does. They make phones and all this stuff, cameras, and Nintendo's like just via games alone is neck and neck with them. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, Nintendo forever has been basically like they started off making cards, and then they moved into being a toy company.
Yep.
Like so for Nintendo as like a whole, video games has just been sort of like a very short duration of the company's existence, and I feel like that kind of informs a lot of the decisions that they make as a company, which is why a lot of the things that they make are kind of a little gimmicky. I think they're continuing this on with like the new Pokeball for like Let's Go Pikachu or whatever. It's a controller, it's a Pokeball.
Yeah, that was kind of strange. He's controlling it with the Pokeball. I remember seeing that now.
Yeah,
so,
the two. Yeah.
So I think there'll be a toy company even long after they've decided that that video games aren't selling anymore. I have this feeling that as a Japanese company that's very a traditional company, run by traditional people,
Yeah.
they'll probably go back into toys if something doesn't work out with their current model.
We got a super chat here from Tom W. Says, "Hey, did anyone ever tell you guys you're beasts?" No, Tom, you're the first one, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you, man. Thank you for the support. Yeah, I think overall we're probably all in agreement on this.
Yeah. Nintendo's not going anywhere, and they won't be just making games for a long time.
Yeah. Which is good. I think overall, it's a good thing to have lots of companies that are doing well. The PlayStation 4 did really well. I hope PlayStation continues to do really well. Nintendo continues to do really well. Hope Xbox can start doing better. Since the 360, they've been down a little bit, but it's good. It's good to have competition. It drives innovation, drives better ideas. It makes the hardware progress faster. And so I hope they all stay in it for the long haul. Okay. That's the end of our podcast, everyone. Thank you.
We're done. Those were all the questions. That was everything.
And thank you, Derek, for coming on and being with us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, appreciate your insight. If you guys want to check out Derek's channel, again, it's in the description. Super Derek RPGs. What's the latest video that you've done that you want people to check out?
Oh, well, the last thing that I just put out the other day was just recapping some news. But if you guys are interested in my take on the Octopath Traveler demo, I have a video about that as well for you to check out.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah, everyone go and check it out. Octopath Traveler demo impressions on Super Derek RPG. If you're listening to this audio only, you got to come watch us on YouTube. That's where it's at. So you can find us at Dark Pixel Gaming on YouTube. You can find Derek at Super Derek RPGs on YouTube. Until next time, you guys have a great week. Peace out.